During these 2.5 years, Ukraine have proven that there are no red lines in Russia. And you probably saw the reaction of Kremlin on different steps from the West. And they started their threats probably from the story about the tanks, delivery of tanks. And they said, look, if you do this, we will do something. It will lead to escalation. Then was HIMARSes, then was artillery, then was Storm Shadow and other things that showed that there are no red lines.
Your President Zelensky is in New York now. He's been calling again for the US to give the go-ahead to fire these longer-range missiles deep into Russia. How important is this week, do you think, and this mission that President Zelensky is on in New York?
I think we are now in a quite crucial moment of this war, and this request about the lifting the restriction is not only one that our president brought to the US. He came with our victory plan, and this victory plan consists of several points. Among them, we have this request for lifting restriction to strike on the territory of Russia. Of course, to speed up the delivery of weapons, because with these limits that we have now, it's quite difficult to stop Russia and to fight against so big army. If we are talking about lifting the restriction of the long-range missiles to use against the legitimate military targets, and I underline these two words, it's important to destroy their capacity to use aircrafts which carry guided bombs, because guided bombs, it's one of the biggest problem now. They use against these bombs against not only Ukrainian army, but against Ukrainian civilians and civil city. And just today we had this strike in Kharkiv, which destroyed the residential building and several people was killed and several of them was injured. So we are asking for the tools which help us to stop these terroristic attacks from the Russian territory, Russian army to the Ukrainian civilian cities. And these long-range missiles can prevent this.
Do you understand why President Biden and some other world leaders are very wary about granting this permission, because they fear that the United States and NATO could be drawn closer into direct conflict with Russia?
You know, I think during these 2.5 years, Ukraine have proven that there are no red lines in Russia. And you probably saw the reaction of Kremlin on different steps from the West. And they started their threats probably from the story about the tanks, delivery of tanks. And they said, look, if you do this, we will do something. It will lead to escalation. Then was HIMARSes, then was artillery, then was Storm Shadow and other things that showed that there are no red lines. And probably the final manifestation of the absence of these red lines in Kremlin was our Kursk operation on the territory of Russia, when we started it because we understood that we have to push them back from the border with Ukraine. So really, I don't understand why our partners are so careful with this, because, you know, every time when we received something, when we have been asking for months, it was not a game changer anymore, because we wait so many time and gave this time to Russia for preparation, that when we got long-range missiles, they just push them. The pods pushed back from the distance that we can on what we can reach these targets. So, yeah, this is the situation what we have now.
The Prime Minister is flying to New York tonight. The Storm Shadow missiles are British, but we need the United States to give the guidance systems for the missiles to be delivered. Would you like to see Keir Starmer and the Foreign Secretary David Lammy, who's also there, pushing harder to actually go ahead and deliver these missiles, to give you these missiles and the permission to fire them into Russian territory?
Yes, of course, and I hope that they will push this decision. And you know, it's strange, but 2 weeks ago, before the meeting between Biden and your Prime Minister Keir Starmer, I had so many insights from the US that the decision already made and it should be announced in some days, probably in 1 or 2 days. And at the same time, we had a meeting of Antony Blinken and Lemmy in Ukraine. And actually, we expected that they announced, probably not they, probably after the meeting between President Biden and Prime Minister Starmer, we will have this decision. But something has changed. I don't know what, because as I said before, my colleague from Congress said, yes, we have some information about the decision that made about this lifting the restriction. I had some calls with journalists from the US, from CNN, Politica, and others, and they also said that according to their sources, this decision was made. But something happened, and this decision probably postponed, probably declined. I don't know, but we're still waiting for this decision because it's still effective tool against the Russian guided bombs.
This is just one part of what President Zelensky wants. He's presenting this victory plan, as he's calling it. I mean, what is this plan for victory beyond, of course, getting the missiles, which we've talked about?
Well, I'm not ready to present this plan because it's up to our president, and for now he presents this plan to leaders of the free world, not only for Biden administration, but I know that for a long-term peace in Ukraine, in Europe, we need to defeat Russia. For Ukraine's victory, we need weapon, we need lifting the restriction to use this weapon against Russia, because we have proven that we can defeat Russia in Kharkiv, in Kherson, and even in Kursk. But with all these limits to use or this weapon, or the limits of the amount of this weapon, it's quite difficult to fight against so big army.